Welcome to the Voice of Thai podcast, a space for stories, insights, and conversations that uplift the profession of teaching and inspire positive change in international schools. For over 40 years, the International Educator has served this community through recruitment resources and a dedication to amplifying the voices of international educators around the world. Welcome to the Voice of Thai podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Stephens, and today's episode is one that really means a lot to me personally. I'm joined by my former colleague, Kyle Wagner, someone who's been championing student-centered learning for years. Now he's embarking on a brand new adventure, launching a Montessori middle school program as its inaugural director at the International Montessori School of Hong Kong. This program blends real-world learning, student agency, and bilingual education. In this episode, Kyle takes us through his path from high-tech high to international education, explains what Montessori school looks like for adolescents, and shares his vision for how schools can prepare students to take on real, meaningful roles in their communities. Whether you're passionate about project-based learning, curious about alternative education models, or just want to hear what it's like to start a school from scratch, this episode is for you. All right. I would like to welcome Kyle Wagner to the Voice of Thai podcast. I'm really excited about having this conversation with Kyle because Kyle and I are former colleagues from the International School of Beijing. And Kyle has been working in this area of student-centered learning for as long as I've known him and the background that he came from even before we worked together at ISB. He has a very interesting background, a strong passion for student-centered learning. And I follow him on LinkedIn. I would really urge you to follow him on LinkedIn. It'll be in the show notes a little bit later on. But Kyle is entering into a brand new adventure and enterprise that just, for me, as someone who's known him so long and known his work for so long, feels like a real culmination of everywhere he's been and everywhere he's been trying to support schools to go. So we want to learn a little bit about this brand new school that you're starting up, Kyle. But before we even start with that, can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and your journey to this point of opening a school in Hong Kong? Like, what brought you to this point? Some of it I know, some of it I might not, but I think for everyone who's listening, like, you have a really rich background in this work, and it would be nice to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Stacy. And I'll try to give the Cliff Note version. It's great to see you again online on video. We were former colleagues for people who are listening into this. And I guess the Cliff Note version starts way back when I was a 22-year-old, first starting teaching back at my old middle school, in fact, in Jamul, California, in San Diego. And I remember specifically having a gifted class, and the principal gave me more free rein on what to do with that gifted class. And, my assumption was, okay, extend their learning, challenge them. Kids were putting on dramatic performances, rebuilding civilizations. I was a history teacher. And, I saw the power in that. And then I heard about this school down the street that was the MO. And it wasn't just for gifted kids. It was for all kids. And I stepped foot into that space. And I will always remember when I first stepped foot into that space. It's this large auditorium type of building that you step into, kind of like an old airplane hangar. You see project work hanging from every corner. You see photography. You see this wheel that you can turn and learn about gears. And these kids greet me at the school and say, "Hi, you must be Kyle." And, I'm taken aback because I'm so used to people calling me by Mr. Wagner, right? That was kind of my first teacher hat, make sure they call you by your last name. So that was unusual. And I said, "Yeah, you can call me Kyle." And they said, "Okay, this is High Tech High. We want to show you around." And what started as just a project for some gifted kids, back at my school down the street, they were sharing with me, photography exhibitions they were putting together, field studies they were doing for the local flora and fauna, contraptions that they had built, showing different physics principles and what they learned. And when I asked what class this was, they looked at me puzzled because there wasn't a class for it. It was just all project-based learning and, project class. So that's kind of how I first fell in love with this way of learning. I got to take that journey into International School of Beijing, where I met Stacy, to start a school within a school program, because we said, if we have international kids who, in international schools who are very, resource rich and don't necessarily have the same state pressures with testing and everything else, why, if we can do it there in California, why can't we do it somewhere else? And then that also led me further down the journey to where I'm at now in starting, a Montessori program, middle school program here in Hong Kong.
Well, one of the things that I always think is interesting is I feel like sometimes you have an opportunity in your career to get in at like the ground level. And I think
Hmm.
of high tech high as being kind of like an original incubator,
Yeah.
for a lot of this thinking. And I think this is where you and I were able to connect through the Futures Academy at the middle school because I happen to be lucky to live in Northern California and get all the PBL training and work with the Barrel Buck Institute. So sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And I just think of you being at High Tech High as like this huge incubator
Yeah.
opportunity. And have a lot of people from High Tech High stepped out and gone international in the way you have? Like, is there a big cadre of you out there working in schools right now
Yeah.
internationally?
I don't know necessarily internationally, but I do know, and I felt this way as well, like you said, this incubator, because it would be a shame if everybody was in this incubator and then just stayed in this kind of like bubble of that incubator, right? And
Hmm.
didn't spread out and support other schools. So everyone's that was in that initial incubator, I talked about 10, 12 years ago, has done something, right, to move the lever, whether it's working with the State Department, and there's a large funding for this in different states, and getting this in the public schools as a class or two, or for a few charter or magnet schools and consulting with them. To my good friend Lonnie Berkvist, who I initially was in this program with, part of this incubation of what it would look like if we had projects as the MO for learning, and she's over in Denmark, and she's supporting
Okay.
lots of different schools in implementing this. And in one way, shape, or form, some have started their own companies, right, consulting along this line of work. So yeah, it is kind of an incubator for this way of thinking. And like you said, if you haven't seen it, right, like if you haven't been a
Right.
part of it, just like I'll probably share a little bit later when you ask me about Montessori, it's just a concept that you think would be great, but would have no idea what it would actually look like. And so that's why, I encourage everyone who's listening to this to step foot in those kind of places,
Yeah.
experience it, have conversations with the kids, because seeing is believing, really.
Well, it's so funny because I do want to ask, like, if you can tell us, Montessori is something that one, you may not know what it is as a model of education, or two, you may associate it more with elementary schools.
Hmm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the philosophy of Montessori? And then what does that look like and mean in a middle school environment?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, Montessori, a lot of people, associate Montessori with the earliest years development. That's true. That's where she did a lot of her writing. And, the Montessori philosophy, my viewpoint of it was that, not knowing anything about Montessori, was that it was like for this select, very kind of like out of the box kind of thinking where kids were just always making decisions about what they did and the teacher was just supporting that. And that's true, to a certain extent. But Montessori is very structured in terms of the way they prepare the curriculum and they prepare the environment. So, from early years to elementary, Montessori talks about these different planes of development. And, there's this plane of development, which kids have this very absorbent mind, and we should prepare an environment that allows them to explore their curiosity. So there are materials, that are around the room that allow them to do that. And children are supposed to always do for themselves. The teacher never should do what a child can do for themselves, and they learn this level of independence. They take that on to this 6 to 12 years, where their mind becomes very much a reasoning mind, where they go the concrete to the abstract. They're just a thirst for knowledge. And so you set up the room, you have like different stations, and you have like little botany cards where you can learn about the different types of plants. You have the history, the timeline of the universe. You have math materials that are very hands-on as well. And you have teachers that have a set of lessons that they're supposed to give to kids, but it's kind of more on that child's schedule. So it's very kind of personalized that way. And so that's the reasoning mind. And then they go into this adolescent period, right? And we all know the challenges of adolescence. And most of the
Right.
time, they would filter into other schools or other programs. But Montessori did some writing about what, an adolescent education should look like. And it wasn't a lot, but she had mentioned, that adolescence, this is the time they've moved beyond what she said, childlike things. And she doesn't mean that in a bad way, but she just means it in a way that students should have adult-like roles. And her vision for an adolescent program was literally that kids would be out managing, running, and learning on a farm. That was the Erdkinder, this whole farm school kind of concept. And, that was when her writing, back then. That is taking different forms now. If you don't necessarily have access to a farm in your Montessori school in an
Right.
urban environment like Hong Kong,
Hong Kong.
if you're in the middle of the city, kind of hard to find a farm. So she also saw that as a business or a shop that kids would continually keep, right? And that's not the whole curriculum, but that kind of practical education where kids are taking on these adult-like roles. And
Okay.
also within this adolescence is the connection of this curriculum that shouldn't be confined necessarily, by subject specific silos. It should be interdisciplinary. And these projects, project-based framework can kind of guide that. And, we're infusing the curriculum within that. And that's, my background is really within project-based learning. So it seemed like a great fit when I, came out to Hong Kong and heard that there was a school that wanted to move into the adolescence realm.
Okay, that's really interesting because that idea of, so this is going to be like a truly integrated program,
Hmm.
project based. That's what I'm hearing. Integrated, project based. Can I ask you to go back because you've referenced she a few times? So, for those of us who don't know about Montessori education as much, who is she? Like, where does Montessori education philosophy originate from, and how long has it been around?
Okay. Yeah, great question. It's been around for close to 100 years. And, it originated in this time of really in this time of war, in this time of like unsettling the whole world. If you think back to, the 1920s, 1930s, that whole kind of time. And her first, she was a scientist, right? But she was a scientist, but also believes very strongly that education should be about peace and educating for peace.
Okay.
And what is that? Yeah. What does that look like? So that was like the larger global context that she came out of. And, she, as a scientist, spent years just documenting different classrooms, the way the classrooms were set up, different education systems in Italy. Um, and, with all these field notes and just purely observing, started to notice what kids kind of tended to just gravitate towards, what
Right.
captured their, imagination, where they're fascinated by. And she believed that, kids have this innate curiosity, and it's really the most important thing for a teacher to do is set up an environment that fosters that innate, curiosity. So when she developed all the Montessori materials that she developed, it was these actually physical manipulatives, the way the classroom was set up, the way the curriculum was set up, the way it was told, which was in these great stories. Like stories was the way you kind of packed curriculum. You didn't necessarily pack it around subject specific content. It
Okay.
was more around these great stories. So you got great stories that kind of is a way of telling a narrative around the curriculum. You've got a prepared environment. You've got mixed age levels because she saw kids naturally wanted to teach each other, right?
Okay.
And lead each other. So you have peer-to-peer teaching, which is another very unique Montessori concept, is peer-to-peer learning, and this whole idea of fostering this level of independence as well. These are some of the core tenets of Montessori.
Okay. So, it sounds like what you also just said was that this idea is coming from a group of people in Hong Kong who wanted to start a middle school Montessori school. So, who are these people? What's their inspiration for this? And then, how did you become connected to them to be, one of the people who's taking the lead on this whole thing?
Yeah, so I'll try to do my best in sharing the founders, their story, right? So there's two founders of this, and it's not coming from nowhere. I mean, they've been established literally the very first Montessori school in Hong Kong,
Okay.
at the early years level. Yeah, this is some 15, 20 years ago. So they've been the longest standing Montessori program. And for one of them, they only attended Montessori school for 1 year, but it was life changing. And they keep talking about that particular year as being so pivotal for them. And I think also it's the narrative of what do they want for their own children, right?
Okay.
And what kind of education do they want for their children? And Hong Kong, as you probably can guess, is this very, very busy, high-paced city that has, a very, very demanding, when it comes to grades and it comes to marks and assessments,
Right.
kind of education system. And really, there was at least this longing, and this need for something different, especially when it comes for your own children, and these founders are both entrepreneurs. They're within the finance industry, entrepreneurship here in Hong Kong. And, that knowing that their direction they took, the education that they received, and wanting something like that for their own children led them to start this. It started one campus, it's expanded to multiple campuses across Hong Kong. And Stanley, which is where I'm based now, is one of the largest campuses, and that moves from early years into elementary. So this is the only really elementary program in
And
Hong
so
Kong.
they're adding that, is it a 6, 7, 8, or what's the range that you're adding next year?
Yeah, so we're adding years. It would be adding year 7 and year 8, because currently, right now, most Montessori programs run in these 3-year cycles, right? And that was based on Montessori's vision of just these different planes of development in terms of how children learn. And so you have a mixed age classroom of 3 different year levels. So you have like 6 through 9, and then you have 9 through 12-year-olds. So they
Okay.
go through this 3-year periods. Typically, they're supposed to go 12 to 15 and then 15 to 18. So these other 3-year periods. But because most secondary programs in the States abroad start in year 9, and to align with that and where kids would be transferring into, since we're not offering a full secondary, decided to make it a year 7, 8 program.
Do you think, I mean, I know it's early, and I mean, you haven't even started the brand new school yet, but is there thinking and plans of saying what might this look like if it went to high school someday? Is that
Yeah.
also part of their ambition for this school?
Well, you're asking one of the number one questions usually the parents have, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are bought into this, but then they hold their breath because they can say, okay, I've got to transfer now at the year 9 period to another international school.
Right.
So I think that the founders for now, because it literally took 6 years, by the way, Stacey, to get this approval. Like
Wow.
that's how difficult it is the to get any approval for anything new here. And I guess with good reason, because there's limited space, and they
Right.
want to make sure that you do it right. So knowing that that takes that long just to get that 2-year program, it's a very long process. And I guess it's
Okay.
it's important to have a bit of, as we mentioned earlier, proof of concept for what it looks like for 2-year levels, and then expand out from there potentially.
So sort of like enthrall us with some of the things that are going to happen next year for these kids. So they're in mixed age groups.
Yep.
So you'll have them for some of them will only be there a year and then move on.
Yeah. Well, that's currently right now. So just to back up, the real large reason we want to start a program like this is because a lot of the parents that had students that are elementary age were demanding like a continuation of this
Right.
Montessori education and what that looks like. So most of our initial cohort are internal families,
Okay.
right? So they're just moving from year 6 to year 7. So it will be mixed age after this year, but primarily this at the start it's going to be
Okay.
year 7, right?
So you've got these kids for basically, you've got them for a couple of years.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have them for a couple years. And the way it works is you have a year A, year B. So the year B, so these kids that are moving on after this year to the
Yeah.
next year B curriculum will be what the new ones coming in, like they'll be mixed together. They'll all get that year B curriculum. And then those ones will move out. Those year 7s will move to year 8, and then you'll have the year A curriculum. So it's divided into kind of these two-year segments that are mixed together.
Okay. So one of the things that you had said is that for Montessori, like her vision of this is that at adolescents, which is the kids you're going to work with, is taking on real adult roles. So,
Yep.
what are some of the systems and structures that you all are going to have as sort of like cornerstones of this
Yep.
program that are like aligned with that Montessori vision and
Sure.
philosophy?
So we have different cornerstones. One of the cornerstones of all Montessori schools is a student-run business, and that is not just for a one project or one unit of study. That is a cornerstone of the program. That's
Okay.
taken the form in some places as a school shop. Some of them it's been a cafe. On the farm, it's literally like chicken coops,
Right.
fresh farm to table food for the community. So it's really it highlights what the community needs, that particular community, and what kind of products the students are developing. But that is something that is ongoing. So that's one of the core tenets that gives them this adult role. The other, of course, as I mentioned, with this project, based learning, and part of the curriculum is delivered in this interdisciplinary way. So, for example, one of the things that kids are going to be pursuing is the future of fuel, the future of food, the future of fashion, right? And this whole idea of this, we have to create cities that have this regenerative type of models. So that's
Hmm.
like an 8-week module or course where we're looking from a scientific lens. What does that look like in terms of food production? What does that look like in terms of impact, on the planet? Okay, but you can also look at that from a humanities lens as well, and from like the urban type of planning lens. Um, and then you can look at it from a design lens, right? Because the kids are going to be designing their own kind of food production systems. They're actually going to be creating those and, having those on campus, whatever they come up with, whether it's vertical gardens, whether it's hydroponics or aquaponics systems, whether it's, the garden that they're building. So, is another core tenet of the program, is having this interdisciplinary academics. Another thing that we add, because it's contextual to Hong Kong, is this bilingual aspect of bilingual immersion. And I think most international schools have that, but it's once you get to secondary, it's less of an immersive and it's more of just, okay, I'm learning language, right? And I'm going to my language class. But we continue that on in year 7 and 8, where it's fully immersive. So students are learning science, they're learning humanities from this dual language
Okay.
perspective. Yeah. So we have
I was going to ask about Chinese. I wondered like how Chinese fit into all of this because I know when I've seen programs done before and we've been a part of a program like that, it just got pulled out and set to the side. So this is one you're really integrating that as well by it being essentially dual language.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have your two sides of that, because one side is, okay, are these kids mixed in terms of their language abilities?
Right.
And there's this immersive experience, which parents are all for, because, it's actual use of the language and development of it. But then, of course, once you get to be a larger program, it's hard to do that and have kids, according to their language level, continue to progress. So we still have our language classes where it's just a
Okay.
small period and we call this kind of like really supporting the work and the academics that's being done within the program. We have these literacies like math, literacies that they develop, as well as our language literacies. So we call them lab or seminar classes, because it's still very kind of discussion, dialogue, um,
Right.
based, right? But it's necessary to just develop that aptitude.
Well, and sometimes direct instruction is the most effective
Yeah.
instruction to deliver what kids need in an efficient amount of time. And then you've got all this time for kids to be in project time. So, like, of your day, like, what percent of your day or your week will kids be dedicating to the various kind of interdisciplinary learning projects?
So that's about a third, about maybe, yeah, a third to like 2/5 of the time, I would say.
Okay.
Or
So,
actually,
still,
yeah, it's more, it actually is probably more to half, because if you consider the student-run business, that
right,
is ongoing. If you consider their own kind of individual projects, and then the projects that are related to the interdisciplinary curriculum, which we try science, humanities, language, and then their design classes, as they have their art music studio, right, in their design classes. So Yeah, we try to have a kind of an equal mix of, about half to half.
So even though like we're sitting here and we're talking about, Montessori, it's a very alternative education model, there's also the parts that we would recognize as school, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, kids getting those content specific areas, but just a lot more of it's going to be integrated and then in seminar when they need that explicit instruction.
Yes, so both, right? Because
Okay.
even during those interdisciplinary periods, like if you walk into the best way to paint this is through a visual. And this is when I was standing outside of a Montessori classroom for the very first time, looking through the window. And I said, first thing I said, where is the teacher?
Yeah. That's your
Because
thing as well. Like we don't
yeah,
want to
yeah,
see
that's
the
kind of my thing
teacher.
too. That's a little plug for my book I wrote right about where is the teacher. But you do see the teacher in the corner, and there's about three or four kids gathered around that teacher getting a lesson, right? And that teacher is presenting a particular concept. So that might be a math concept, right? And they're using blocks to show, how to factor an equation, right? In mathematics, but it might be a science lesson as well, and they're doing a small experiment, but it's only with a small group of kids, right?
Okay.
The other kids are working independently, extending the other lessons that were given, right? So that's what it looks like in an elementary school, but those are several lessons across many different subjects, and they extend each of those lessons. In middle school, it changes to be more around this bigger theme. So there's a lot of lessons associated to that bigger theme to go
Theme.
deeper on these projects, because this is kids in the adolescent stage really, not saying they don't in elementary, but they really want to have, meaning and purpose, and why am I doing this, and how is this connecting to what I need to do outside of school. So
So now
that's
another question that I have is, so you started at High Tech High. You
mhm.
went to ISB and started the Futures Academy, which was kind of a wall-to-wall PBL program, integrated learning. How similar or different is this from what you've done before?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think there are some similarities, and there are definitely some differences. The whole concept of student led business is very new. So that's going to be definitely a new component. I think this bilingual immersion component
Mm,
is is quite different as well, because a lot of parents, when we ask them what's the biggest selling point, why do you want a Montessori education, they really like this bilingual aspect. So that is looking different as well. I think in terms of the actual projects and connections that we're making, is different. Ours was very at the Futures Academy was very much, project based, and it all revolved around the kids doing, a very similar type of project.
right.
This is more us presenting the theme, the large question that drives it, having our breaking up our different kind of foundation learning, investigation to their actual iteration. But I foresee them developing a lot more of their own, unique ideas and projects around these particular themes, potentially than how it was at International School of Beijing or in High Tech High.
So an even
Simply
higher degree of student agency, like you're really where you're moving the needle is
yeah,
on student involvement and agency and direction of what is happening.
yeah,
Mm,
exactly.
that's
I mean,
awesome.
the what Montessori says is like the greatest sign for a teacher is to simply say, like, the kids are working as if I didn't exist, right? And that's what
Right.
I've constantly been trying to seek out. And I think Montessori teachers, by the way, I went through part of this training, but they go through like a 2 year training simply on like their own spiritual development, which sounds a little bit like new agey, but it's less about, organizing your lessons and planning the curriculum. That's quite important. It's more about how that's presented and how you are a presence in the classroom to allow for this agentic learning. And when there are
Mm,
gaps, to be able to identify what those gaps are, pulling, some kids aside and say, hey, I've noticed this. Here's some lessons that I'm gonna offer that's gonna support you in this particular concept, or to go deeper. And, then kind of stepping aside out of the way. It's true Montessori adolescent programs, we're not there yet because we're just starting, have
right.
these morning cycles and afternoon cycles. And literally, there's these long chunks of time, and they have a few seminar classes skill building that's mixed into that, but then it's the kids are organizing their time around the objectives they need to achieve for each week, right? That's the goal. We're not
That's
there
the
yet. We
goal.
haven't started.
So I think my last question is really like, what are you most excited about with this new opportunity and creating this new program? And what are you most paying attention to see how it's going? Like,
Mhm.
what gets you excited and what are you like, we got to watch this because, this is going to be really important as we go through.
Yeah. So I mean, it's easier for me to start on the challenging side, but I want to start with the excitement side because this is launching in about a month. The excitement side is that you have a population, you have parents at a school that already believe in this way of learning, right? They already believe in this very kind of child-centric, teacher as a facilitator, fostering this level of independence. So there's no one really necessary to sell, quote unquote, this kind of concept, right? So that is what I'm most excited about. But with that, the challenges that come is actually in the delivery, right, of this
Yeah.
of this model, the connections within the community to make this most real world for students. As we know, you've been involved in this work, that takes time to develop
Yeah.
those level of partnerships. The academic side of things as well, this is for the math development that is going to be important when they transition into secondary school, to ensure that we are keeping kids up to the right literacy level when it comes to moving on. um, and I think just the overall coordination of a lot of moving pieces, that's the part that is challenging to fit the puzzle together. And fortunately, we have a very small cohort to start with, so
Right.
we can really kind of figure these things out, as we expand to future years.
Well, we're really excited to follow you along this journey. And so for listeners, our plan this year is to do a couple of updates with Kyle that we'll put out into the Thai newsletter and then sort of wrap it up at the end of the year with another podcast so we can see how it went and what you learned. Take pictures, take video. We want to see the kids, in action when we're able to put out the newsletter. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm so excited to see this work happening in an international school that already exists and really picking up a new model and moving it forward. I just think it's so exciting and I just can't wait to watch it unfold for you, Kyle.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on and reaching out. I mean, I'll turn this on you, which is probably a bit unusual, but what excites you the most about, or currently, what's exciting you the
Yeah.
most about possibility, right, with education?
I think for me, well, I mean, I think when I saw what you were doing, what got me the most excited is I feel like I've now been in a few schools that have done these models that are school within schools, and I see the challenges of that.
Hmm.
And I think the fact that you're in a Montessori environment, like wholly contained in that environment, does that, give an even more fertile ground,
Hmm.
for success? Does that
Hmm.
diminish some of the challenges of being, in an already existing school? I think there's several schools doing lots of different things, but then it ends up being pathways or a track when there's nothing wrong with that. I think we need to be offering more of those things to schools. But I think the more we see proof of these concepts, the more of those opportunities can follow for students
Yeah.
so that we don't all
Yeah.
have to just be lockstep, only one way. And I just think you're in a really fertile environment. I've always thought, I think, as international teachers, we're always like, where do you want to start a school? Where needs a school? And I've actually always thought like Hong Kong, Singapore, that's where you go in and do something really different and
Hmm.
new because it's a really big market and it's a
Hmm.
market differentiator. And you're going to
Hmm.
have people who want that difference.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of excited about it from, I think, that economics piece around like school choice, but then also I think that opportunity that you have to build within an environment that's committed to that philosophy.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, as you mentioned, right, choice, and to simply be able to say this is not for everyone or
Right.
every family, right? And in a competitive market, to be able to safely say that and not just be trying to fill seats. You want to fill seats, of
Yeah.
course, for every program, but you got to be true to to what your ethos is, and the families that believe in that, you're going to attract the right people into it.
I'm just excited to watch it unfold. So Kyle, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be checking in with you later.
All right. Thanks so much, Stacy.
Okay. Thank you for joining the Voice of Thai podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and our newsletter so you don't miss out on all of the stories and resources from the International Schools community. Check out the show notes for links and more information for this episode. You can also find us online at www.thaimonline.com and in all of your favorite social media places.